I don't know. I was lucky. I had a lot of smart guys in my band. They were smart.
Elvis Presley, the prowling thunderstorm. In a moment that felt more like velvet lightning than casual conversation, Linda Ronstadt leaned back in her chair, turquoise earrings catching the light, and without hesitation named the first man who made her weak in the knees, Elvis Presley. But to simply call him the king would be an understatement bordering on disrespect. According to Linda, Elvis didn't just walk into a room, he prowled, shifted the air, and rearranged the molecules. "You felt him before you saw him," she said, and the description wasn't metaphor, it was electricity. His presence, magnetic and primal, turned stages into altars and green rooms into temptation zones. One glance from Elvis and the most seasoned, self-assured women would find themselves flushed like nervous teenagers. Linda admitted with a smirk that had Elvis ever crooked his finger at her, she would have left footprints across Graceland without looking back. His voice, she said, wasn't just singing, it was velvet mixed with fire, resonating through your bones and straight into places your conscience forgot to warn you about. One casual greeting from Elvis, "How you doing, darling?" nearly buckled her at the knees, forcing her to steady herself against a wall like someone hit with the aftershock of a memory. And while Elvis's reputation as a heartbreaker was legendary, Linda made it clear that what made him dangerous wasn't just the screaming fans or swiveling hips. It was that quiet low drawl that made every woman feel like she might just be the only one who truly mattered. "He could have had anyone," she sighed. "But when he looked at you, it felt like he'd already chosen you." That illusion, Linda admitted, was enough to make even the most grounded woman wonder what might happen if she just said yes. And she almost did. One post-show moment, sweat still clinging to Elvis's collar and the stage lights cooling down, he passed her backstage murmuring a simple compliment, "Hell of a performance tonight." It wasn't the words, she said. It was the way he said them, low, rough, and meant only for her, that nearly lured her straight into the dark behind him. But she didn't follow. "If I'd been braver or dumber," she laughed, "I would have chased that velvet voice into the night." Instead, she walked away with nothing but the memory and the what-ifs, which, in her words, sometimes keep you warmer than the truth ever could. Mick Jagger, the sin in tight pants. From the moment Linda Ronstadt uttered his name, the mood shifted, playful turned primal, and flirtation turned into a full-blown memory of temptation barely resisted. Mick Jagger wasn't just a rock star to Linda. He was sin incarnate in tight pants, a walking, sweating embodiment of rhythm and rebellion that turned concert stages into confessional booths. "He didn't just sing rock," she said with a gleam in her eye, "he sweated it," and from the way she spoke, it was clear she would have happily sweat right alongside him. Jagger in her eyes didn't perform, he possessed. Every strut across the stage wasn't just choreography, it was a declaration of war on restraint. His hips, she swore, had more to say than most people's mouths, and when he moved, it wasn't just music, it was foreplay in motion. Linda watched him from backstage, from audiences, from inches away, and every time she thought, no wonder half the world fell at his feet. He could have read the phone book and we still would have fainted. But the danger wasn't just on stage. Close, Jagger was a calculated flirt with a grin that read minds and eyes that dared you to break your own rules. He stood too close, whispered too low, and looked at you like the entire world was a private joke meant for just the two of you. He smelled like leather, cigarettes, and decisions you regret at sunrise, but only after smiling through the night. Every time he said hello, Linda admitted, it felt like an invitation to do something reckless. And Lord help me, I wanted to RSVP. There was a wildness about him that made even the most grounded woman feel like she'd been walking on the edge of boring for too long. He didn't need to seduce her with a song. He only had to roll those hips, curl his lip, and suddenly the idea of trading her dignity for a backstage pass felt less like madness and more like destiny. "He made me feel things," she confessed, "dangerous, shameless things. Like I was ready to become the kind of girl you write heartbreak songs about." And when she caught herself daydreaming about it long after the shows were over, she knew the spell had worked. Mick didn't have to touch her to undress her resolve. He just had to move, and she'd already fallen halfway. If Elvis was the thunderstorm and Jagger the wildfire, James Taylor was the slow-burning candle that flickered in the quiet corners of Linda Ronstadt's memory. In her words, his voice wasn't just music. It was comfort, confession, and calamity wrapped in a soft-spoken lullaby that never quite let you sleep. "If he ever sang me a lullaby in private," she laughed, "I wouldn't have slept a wink. I'd have kept him awake all night." Taylor didn't need to strut or smolder. His power came in whispers and longing glances, in the way he cradled a guitar like it held secrets and sang each note like it might break him. To Linda, he was a man who made vulnerability not just attractive but dangerous. His voice wrapped around her like a quilt on a cold night, full of ache and tenderness that dared you to get close, and punished you if you did. Watching him sing was like being allowed to read a diary no one else was supposed to see. His songs carried a sadness so pure it made you want to heal him or test just how much heartbreak he could bear. "When James looked at you," she recalled, "you felt like he was seeing something sacred. And Lord, if he ever looked at me that way in private, I'd forget my own name." Linda wasn't alone. Every woman in the crowd imagined him strumming on their porch, drinking sweet tea and singing just for them. But she liked to believe her fantasy felt more real. He had that rare magnetism that crept up slowly, wrapped around you, and then whispered temptations between chords. And unlike the loud lovers who left chaos in their wake, James made you crave the quiet destruction, the kind that starts with a soft gaze and ends with your heart wide open. He didn't just sing heartbreak, he embodied it, gently delivering emotional ruin with a smile and a soft acoustic hook. "I used to imagine," she admitted, "what it would feel like if he hummed Fire and Rain just for me. That fire would have burned all night long." Don Henley, Her Eagle and Her Firestorm. If If James Taylor was the sweet ache of longing, Don Henley was the electric aftermath of a storm you never wanted to end. My Eagle, Linda called him, a title that flew far beyond professional respect and straight into romantic chaos. With Henley, it wasn't speculation, it was history, and a fiery one at that. He was trouble wrapped in denim, and Linda made it crystal clear. Sometimes trouble is exactly what a girl wants. He didn't glide into rooms, he entered like a southern sermon with Texas grit in his throat and mischief in his stare. We weren't just colleagues, she said pointedly. We were entangled musically and otherwise. Their duets weren't just harmonies, they were confessions, their choruses thick with tension that threatened to burst at every note. Henley wore his passion like a second skin, and she loved it, even when it bruised. He was the kind of man who'd scribble lyrics one minute and challenge your soul the next. They argued like thunderstorms, loud, sharp, and explosive, but behind every clash was chemistry so undeniable it made silence feel like surrender. He had a way of making even his anger feel poetic, Linda confessed, like he could sing about heartbreak and then break your heart in the same hour just to prove it was real. She laughed, but the grin was nostalgic and raw. Nights with Don weren't just memories, they were verses that still echoed. He'd say one line, raspy and low, and she'd feel it crawl under her skin, straight to where it hurt and felt good. He was denim, dust, and danger, she said, and when asked if she regretted it, she grinned. Sometimes, she whispered, danger isn't something you run from, sometimes it's the best verse of the whole song. Jackson Browne, the poet who undressed you with lyrics. When Linda Ronstadt spoke about Jackson Browne, her tone shifted, softer, breathier, almost reverent. He wasn't a firework or a wildfire. He was something more dangerous, the slow burn of a poet who wrote truths that exposed you before you even knew you were vulnerable. He wrote songs that undressed you with words, she said, and the glint in her eye made it clear she hadn't fully recovered. Unlike the bold boys who demanded attention, Jackson watched from the corners of the room, waiting until one perfect sentence could make a woman forget her name. He didn't need to chase you, she confessed. He just wrote the map and you chased yourself into his arms. With his guitar in hand and head bowed low, Jackson wasn't performing, he was opening a diary and letting you read the secret pages. His lyrics weren't loud, but they stuck. They whispered, ached, and lingered in the spaces between notes. And Linda knew the danger wasn't in what he said, but how he made you feel after. One wrong note, one look too long, and I'd have been lost, she admitted. And the truth is, I wouldn't have minded being lost with him. There was always something about the quiet ones, the way their silences dared you to fill them with your own meaning. Jackson made rebellion sound romantic and heartbreak feel noble. If he ever leaned in after a show, still humming, and whispered just one lyric into her ear, Linda swore she'd have walked out without grabbing her coat, willingly undone by poetry wrapped in a man. Paul McCartney, the mischievous sweetheart. Among the brooders, preachers, and heartbreak poets stood one man who didn't need darkness to make women fall. Paul McCartney, the sunshine that blinded you with charm. Cute as a button, Linda grinned, and dangerous in his own sneaky way. He didn't strut like Jagger or smolder like Elvis. Paul disarmed you with warmth, a smile that felt like an inside joke, and a voice so honey-sweet it made even nonsense feel like romance. If he ever hummed a Beatles throwaway at me, she laughed, I'd have melted like butter on a hot skillet. McCartney had that uncanny ability to make every woman feel seen, really seen, even if there were hundreds in the room. When he spoke, people leaned in, not because he was loud, but because you didn't want to miss the magic. Linda recalled one moment where he wasn't even singing, just humming a melody under his breath, and it felt like watching sunlight drip from a spoon. That's how dangerous he was. He could smile, tilt his head, and suddenly your legs didn't work right. Those eyes, she said, always sparkling, always up to something. And even when you knew it wasn't just for you, it didn't matter, because in that moment you believed it. She confessed with a laugh, he could have sung the alphabet and I'd have been a puddle. There was a softness to Paul that made you trust him and a mischief that made you doubt yourself. And that combination, Linda warned, was more dangerous than any leather-clad rocker. Bono, the saint wrapped in leather. As Linda reached the end of her scandalous list, she saved a different kind of flame for last. Bono, a crush that came later but burned just as hot. Where the others seduced with guitars and gazes, Bono came in like a spiritual tsunami, part preacher, part rebel, all swagger. He looked at you, Linda said, and it felt like he was about to save your soul and ruin your reputation in the same breath. He wasn't part of her era, but he didn't need to be. Bono brought that Irish fire, wrapped in leather pants and sunglasses that made it impossible to know what he was thinking, but easy to imagine. He had the voice of a stadium prophet, commanding tens of thousands, yet still made you feel like the only one in the crowd. That's the real danger, she smirked, making you believe you're the only one when you definitely weren't. Bono didn't just flirt, he challenged. Every grin was a dare, every lyric a test of your emotional fireproofing. He had that rare mix of saint and sinner, able to inspire world peace and wicked fantasies in the same concert. And when he dropped his shades just low enough to make eye contact, it wasn't an accident, it was a calculated collision. He carried redemption and ruin in the same kiss, she said, fanning herself as if the memory still lingered in the air. And Linda, for all her poise, admitted she might have followed him, halo and all, into a kind of glorious disaster. He made you want to say yes, she whispered, and part of me still wishes I had. As the final name slipped from Linda Ronstadt's lips, She leaned back with a grin that held decades of secrets and just enough mischief to keep the cameras rolling. "Now don't go writing gossip," she teased the host, waving her hand like she could brush away the memory of 1,000 stolen glances and unsent invitations. But her voice softened, dipped in nostalgia, and without breaking eye contact she added, "But those 7, they kept me up at night. And not just because their songs were stuck in my head." It wasn't scandal she served, it was candor, the kind that left room for both admiration and envy. Each man she named, Elvis, Mick, James, Don, Jackson, Paul, and Bono, wasn't just a crush or a colleague. They were living symbols of temptation wrapped in melody and wrapped around her memory. She didn't paint them as flawless gods or dangerous demons, but as beautifully flawed magnetic forces who could charm a stadium and shake her heart without even trying. Some she stood beside on stage, others she watched from afar, and a few, she admitted, lingered in dreams more vividly than reality ever allowed. What made her confessions hit harder wasn't just the stories, it was how she told them. With humor, with heat, and with just enough restraint to make you wonder what she left out. She never claimed to have surrendered to any of them, but the way her eyes danced, the way her breath caught at the memory of a whispered compliment or a sultry lyric, told a different story, a story of what might have been. And perhaps that's the real power of Linda Ronstadt's list. It wasn't about conquest or regret. It was about the thrill of almost, the ache of maybe, the satisfaction of having stood close enough to greatness to feel the spark, but just far enough away to never get burned. "Sometimes," she said finally, "the what-ifs keep you warmer than the memories." And with that, the room exhaled, the camera zoomed, and Linda, as always, left the audience wanting more, not another song, but another secret. The kind of secret that lives in backstage shadows, echoes in the final chord of a duet, and lingers just behind the smile of a woman who's seen everything, and still blushes when you ask about the boys.